In the winter of 1964, an 18-year-old girl stepped off a Greyhound bus in Nashville, carrying everything she owned in a cardboard suitcase tied shut with clothesline rope. Dolly Rebecca Parton stood 5 feet tall, weighed barely 100 pounds, and possessed a voice that could shatter glass and mend broken hearts in the same breath. But the men behind the polished desks of Music Row saw something else entirely. A dirt-poor Appalachian girl with an accent so thick it sounded like a punchline. A figure they dismissed as a distraction, and dreams so absurdly large they laughed her out of the room before she finished her first sentence. What none of them knew, what she carried like a stone in her chest, was that 3 nights before boarding that bus, she had knelt beside her grandmother's bed and whispered a promise she would become somebody, even if it killed her trying. There is an irony in Dolly Parton's story that hurts too much to be coincidence. The child who grew up so desperately poor her family stuffed newspapers into the cabin walls because insulation was a luxury they could not afford. The teenager who discovered that singing was the only fire poverty could not extinguish, the only warmth winter could not steal from her frozen fingers. The woman who built her entire empire on abundance, on rhinestones, on being the most impossibly glamorous creature to ever emerge from a dirt floor cabin in the Smoky Mountains. All of that constructed so carefully across 6 extraordinary decades, so that time would arrive with its quiet cruelty and begin threatening the very voice that had rescued her, the instrument that had been her oxygen since she first learned to breathe. How does a barefoot child from a one-room cabin with no electricity transform into one of the most successful self-made women in American entertainment history? What has she buried beneath that famous smile, that glittering armor of wigs and sequins she wears like a shield against a world that once told her she was nothing? What happens when the voice that saved your life begins to thin, when the body you turned into a brand starts whispering betrayal, when the fame you sacrificed everything to build becomes a gilded cage you cannot escape? To understand all of that, we need to go back to the beginning, to Locust Ridge in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, to January 19, 1946, and to a girl who learned in the cruelest way imaginable that love without money is a beautiful thing that can still break you. Dolly Rebecca Parton entered this world screaming during one of the most savage winters the Smoky Mountains had seen in a generation. The snow lay so thick on Locust Ridge that the doctor almost didn't make it up the mountain road, his truck sliding on ice, while inside that tiny cabin her mother gripped the bedframe and prayed. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, was a sharecropper and construction laborer who could not read or write his own name, a shame he carried like a scar no one was allowed to touch. Her mother, Avie Lee Owens, had married Robert at 15 and would spend the next 20 years either pregnant or nursing, bringing 12 children into a world that had precious little room for them. The doctor who delivered Dolly was paid with a sack of cornmeal. There was no money. There was never any money. The cabin had no electricity, no running water, no windows that could keep the mountain cold from creeping through every crack like something alive and hungry. The children slept 3 and 4 to a bed, tangled together for warmth, their breath rising in white clouds that hung in the freezing dark. Dolly would later remember lying awake on those bitter nights, staring at pages from old Sears catalogs pasted to the walls, tracing pictures of pretty dresses with her fingertip, imagining herself into a world where such things were possible. The smell of that cabin never left her. Wood smoke and lard, and the sharp scent of too many bodies in too small a space, and beneath it all something she could not name until she was older. It was the smell of desperation, wearing the mask of dignity. There was no privilege in the Parton home, no connections to anyone who mattered, no road leading anywhere except deeper into the mountains and deeper into want. But there was something more powerful than all of that. There was a child who felt the world with such raw intensity that ordinary life seemed to burn her. A girl who heard music in the wind, through the pine trees, and melody in her mother's exhausted humming as she cooked beans over a wood stove for the 14th consecutive night. The wound Dolly carried was not one wound, but many, layered like the winters that buried Locust Ridge year after relentless year. The poverty came first, so absolute that she wore dresses stitched from feed sacks, walking into school each morning knowing exactly what the other children would say. Trash. White trash. Mountain garbage. They said it to her face with the casual savagery only children possess, and each word landed like a small stone thrown at something already bruised. But deeper than the poverty was something she rarely discussed publicly: the suffocating chaos of that overcrowded cabin. A father ground silent by exhaustion and illiteracy. A mother drowning in children she loved, but could barely feed. Years later, Dolly would confess with a voice still raw from the memory, "We had nothing. I mean nothing. I dreamed myself out of that life because the alternative was to disappear into it forever. But the shame of being that poor, of kids looking at you like you were less than dirt, that never fully leaves you. Not ever." At 8 years old, Dolly found salvation in the strangest of places. Her uncle Bill Owens, her mother's brother, noticed something in the girl that nobody else had time to see. While the other children played in the creek or chased chickens through the yard, Dolly sat on the porch humming melodies she had invented, songs that came from somewhere no one could explain. Uncle Bill gave her a tiny homemade guitar fashioned from an old mandolin and 2 extra strings. It was crude and barely held tune, but when Dolly wrapped her small fingers around that neck and strummed for the first time, something extraordinary happened. The poverty disappeared. The cold vanished. The cruel voices of school children faded into silence. For the first time in her short life, Dolly Parton was not the trashy girl from the mountain. She was someone else entirely. Someone powerful. Someone who could make the air itself bend to her will. She began performing on the porch of the family cabin, singing for her younger siblings who gathered around her like she was a campfire in the dead of winter. Her mother would pause at the doorway, hands still wet from washing, and listen with tears tracking silently down her cheeks. It was not talent yet. It was recognition. The absolute bone-deep certainty of a child who has found the one place in the universe where she belongs. By 10, she was performing on local radio shows. By 13, she had appeared on the Grand Ole Opry stage in Nashville, where Johnny Cash himself took her hand backstage and whispered words she would carry forever. "Honey, you have a gift. Don't let anybody tell you different." She went back to Locust Ridge and told her mother she was going to Nashville the day after high school graduation. Her mother looked at her with the particular sadness of a woman who had watched too many dreams die in those mountains and said nothing at all. The morning after she graduated from Sevier County High School in 1964, the first person in her family to earn a diploma, Dolly packed that cardboard suitcase and climbed aboard a Greyhound bus pointed toward Nashville. She carried $47, a bag of her mother's cornbread wrapped in cloth, and a collection of songs she had been writing since she could hold a pencil. Nashville in the mid-1960s was not kind to mountain girls with big hair and bigger ambitions. It was a city that ran on connections and conformity. A town built by men who decided which women were worthy of attention and which were worthy of forgetting. The music industry machine had already chewed up thousands of young hopefuls and spit them out like tobacco juice. Nashville did not welcome Dolly with open arms. It welcomed her with indifference so complete it felt like erasure. She rented a room above a laundromat on Wedgwood Avenue, a space barely large enough to hold a bed and her guitar case. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through the plaster, thin enough that she knew the couple next door fought every Thursday night about money they did not have. She ate mustard sandwiches and ketchup soup, mixing packets of free condiments with hot water from the tap because groceries were a luxury reserved for weeks when she managed to land a gig singing backup at a recording session for $15. Casting after casting, the doors slammed shut. Record label executives looked her up and down like they were appraising livestock, then delivered their verdicts with a cruelty so casual it felt rehearsed. Too country, too short, too loud, too much. One producer told her she sounded like a cartoon character. Another suggested she might have better luck waiting tables, adding with a smirk that she certainly had the figure for good tips. She smiled at every insult, thanked them for their time, walked outside, and cried in alleyways where nobody could see her. There were moments when Nashville felt not like an opportunity, but like a punishment. Nights when she lay on that thin mattress above the laundromat, listening to the mechanical rumble of dryers spinning below her, wondering if her mother had been right to say nothing at all, wondering if silence had been mercy. She counted every rejection like rosary beads, and by the end of her first year, the number had climbed past 100 and kept climbing. In the autumn of 1965, she reached a point so low it nearly swallowed her whole. Her money was gone. Her rent was 3 weeks overdue. She had eaten nothing but crackers and tap water for 4 days. She sat on the floor of that tiny apartment with her guitar across her knees and a razor blade on the bathroom sink. And for one terrible suspended moment she considered the mathematics of surrender. The sum of all those rejections weighed against the $47 of hope she had carried off that bus. The equation did not balance in her favor. Years later, she would speak about that night with the careful precision of someone describing a wound that never fully closed. I was as low as a person can get without going under completely. I had nothing left. No money, no food, no reason to believe tomorrow would be any different. But something inside me, something stubborn and stupid and beautiful, just refused to let me quit. I heard my grandmother's voice saying, "You promised me, Dolly. You promised." She put the razor blade in the trash. She picked up her guitar, and she began writing a song about a woman who refuses to be broken by the world. That song would never be recorded, but the woman who wrote it would change music forever. In the spring of 1966, something shifted in the machinery of fate. Dolly had taken a job writing songs for Combine Publishing, earning $50 a week to produce melodies for other artists, singers who had the connections and the conventional looks that Nashville demanded. She was invisible by design, a ghost who poured her soul into lyrics that other voices would claim. But her uncle Bill Owens, who had followed her to Nashville and refused to let her talent be buried, kept pushing her name into every room that would listen. It was during one of those forgettable songwriter sessions that Monument Records founder Fred Foster heard a demo Dolly had recorded almost as an afterthought. The song was called "Dumb Blonde," and there was nothing dumb about it. Foster heard something in that voice that the 100 executives before him had missed entirely. Not just the clarity, not just the range that could climb from whiskey-dark valleys to crystalline mountain peaks in a single breath. He heard defiance. He heard a woman who had swallowed enough rejection to fill a river and transformed it into something that sparkled like broken glass in sunlight. Monument Records signed her in 1967, and Dumb Blonde climbed to number 24 on the Billboard country charts. It was not a smash. It was not a revolution. But it was proof. Proof that the girl from Locust Ridge had not imagined her own voice into existence. The industry noticed, not because of the chart position, but because of what happened when Dolly performed the song live. She owned the stage like she had been born on it, which in a way she had been, singing on that cabin porch for siblings who needed warmth more than they needed food. Then came the invitation that would change everything. Porter Wagoner, the rhinestone-suited king of country television, needed a new female vocalist for his syndicated show. His previous partner had left, and he was looking for someone pretty enough for the camera and talented enough to keep up with him. He chose Dolly, and in doing so unknowingly handed the keys of his kingdom to the woman who would eventually outgrow him so completely that the separation would break his heart in ways that never healed. The Porter Wagoner show gave Dolly something Nashville had denied her for 3 brutal years: an audience. Millions of living rooms across America suddenly had this tiny, radiant, impossibly charismatic woman singing directly into their hearts every week. The chemistry between Porter and Dolly was electric, professional and personal boundaries blurring in ways that fueled both the music and the gossip columns. Together they recorded hit after hit, their voices intertwining like 2 rivers meeting at a confluence neither had planned. But behind the sequined curtain of success, a tension was building that would eventually detonate with devastating force. Porter Wagoner saw Dolly as his creation, his discovery, his property. He had given her the platform, and he expected loyalty that looked remarkably like obedience. Dolly, meanwhile, was writing songs that were too big for duets, too personal for shared billing, too hungry for the constraints of being someone's partner when she was built to be a force of her own. By 1973, Dolly knew she had to leave. The decision terrified her because Porter was not just a collaborator, but a mentor, a father figure, a man who had believed in her when believing was an act of financial recklessness. Leaving him felt like betrayal. Staying felt like burial. She chose the pain of freedom over the comfort of captivity, and she wrote him a song to explain what she could not say to his face. That song was I Will Always Love You. She sat across from Porter in his office and sang it to him directly, tears streaming down both their faces, her voice breaking on the bridge in a way that made the imperfection feel like the most honest sound ever recorded. Porter wept openly. Then he told her to go. Then he sued her for breach of contract, demanding $1 million and years of legal warfare that would scar both of them permanently. The song itself became a #1 country hit in 1974. But its true resurrection would come nearly 2 decades later, when Whitney Houston recorded it for the soundtrack of The Bodyguard in 1992, transforming it into one of the best-selling singles in music history. The royalties from that single recording alone would eventually earn Dolly Parton an estimated $20 million. The song she had written as a goodbye to a man who wanted to own her became the financial foundation of her entire empire. There is a poetry in that transformation so precise it feels authored by something larger than coincidence. The girl who had been told she was too much, too country, too loud, too short, had written a simple love song in a moment of heartbreak and fear, and that song would outlive every critic, every executive, every man who had ever looked at her and seen only a body to be assessed, or a talent to be controlled. By the late 1970s, Dolly Parton was no longer Porter Wagoner's girl singer. She was no longer Nashville's secret weapon hidden behind a publishing deal. She had crossed over into pop music with Here You Come Again, which hit #1 on the country charts and climbed to #3 on the pop charts in 1977. She was everywhere. Television appearances, magazine covers, sold-out concerts. The cardboard suitcase girl had arrived. And she had arrived with such spectacular force that the industry could no longer pretend she did not exist. In 1980, Hollywood came calling with an offer that seemed designed specifically for Dolly Parton to fail. The film was called 9 to 5, a comedy about 3 secretaries who kidnapped their sexist boss, and Dolly had never acted a single day in her life. The studio executives were nervous. Her co-stars, Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, were established actresses with decades of experience between them. Dolly was a country singer with big hair and a bigger accent, and the smart money said she would embarrass herself on screen. Instead, she stole the entire movie. Her performance as Dorothy Rhodes, the secretary constantly harassed by her lecherous boss, carried a knowing weariness that felt lived rather than performed. Critics who had expected a cartoon discovered a natural actress with comic timing so precise it seemed impossible for a debut performance. The film grossed over $100 million, becoming one of the highest-grossing comedies of the year. And the theme song Dolly wrote for it, also titled 9 to 5, hit #1 on both the country and pop charts simultaneously, earning her Grammy Awards and an Academy Award nomination. She had done the impossible. She had crossed from music into film, from country into pop, from regional novelty into global phenomenon. The little girl who had worn feed-sack dresses was now being photographed for Vogue, interviewed by Barbara Walters, discussed in boardrooms where men in expensive suits tried to calculate exactly how much her image was worth. The answer was more than they could count, but there is a price for everything, and Dolly was about to learn exactly what her dreams would cost her. In 1966, the same year she first broke into Nashville, she had met a man named Carl Dean at the wishy-washy laundromat on her very first day in town. He was tall, quiet, and completely uninterested in the music industry that consumed her every waking thought. They married in 1966, in a tiny ceremony in Ringgold, Georgia, with only Dolly's mother present as witness. Carl Dean would never walk a red carpet. He would never give an interview. He would become the most famous invisible husband in entertainment history. Their marriage survived because Carl wanted nothing from Hollywood, and Hollywood wanted nothing from Carl. He stayed home in Nashville, running his asphalt paving business, while Dolly circled the globe like a sequined comet trailing rhinestones through the stratosphere. It was an arrangement that worked precisely because it defied every expectation of what a celebrity marriage should look like. But it came with a sacrifice that Dolly would carry quietly for decades. She never had children. By the late 1980s, she began speaking about this absence with increasing candor, revealing that she had suffered from endometriosis, a condition that caused her tremendous physical pain and contributed to a partial hysterectomy that closed the door on biological motherhood forever. The girl from a family of 12, who had helped raise her younger siblings like they were her own, who had bottle-fed babies before she could read, would never hold a child that carried her blood. Years later, she would admit with characteristic honesty tinged with something that sounded like grief, "I think God knew what he was doing. If I'd had kids, I would have stayed home and been consumed by them. My career would have suffered. But there are nights, even now, when I wonder who I would have been as a mother, what songs I would have sung to them, what pieces of myself I might have given that I gave to strangers instead." The 1980s brought extraordinary success and extraordinary emptiness in equal measure. She launched her own variety show. She starred in more films, including The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, alongside Burt Reynolds, and Steel Magnolias, which showcased dramatic abilities nobody had suspected she possessed. She opened Dollywood in 1986, a theme park in the Smoky Mountains of her childhood, transforming her personal mythology into a tourist destination that would eventually employ more people than any other attraction in Tennessee. But behind the relentless productivity, something was cracking. The schedule was inhuman. The pressure to maintain her image, her weight, her impossible figure, her elaborate wigs, her rhinestone armor, was grinding her down in ways she could not admit publicly. She began gaining weight. She tried every diet imaginable. She underwent cosmetic procedures that she would later discuss with disarming frankness. But at the time, the tabloids were merciless. They called her a joke, a plastic surgery disaster, a relic of a bygone era clinging to relevance through surgical intervention. The same industry that had celebrated her crossover success now sharpened its knives with the glee of critics who had been waiting for her to fall. In 1991, Dolly Parton stood in her bathroom, looked at herself in the mirror, and did not recognize the woman staring back. She was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. She was lonely in a way that fame only amplified. She had spent 3 decades building an empire, and now that empire felt like a prison constructed from her own sequins and smiles. The depression came like a fog rolling down the mountain, slow and cold and absolute. She would later call it the darkest period of her life. Darker even than those early Nashville days of mustard sandwiches and rejection letters. "I was drowning," she would confess. "Drowning in everything I had created. And nobody could see it. Because the wig was perfect, and the makeup was perfect, and the smile never cracked. But inside, I was dying." The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in 1991. Dolly was sitting in her bedroom in Nashville, surrounded by awards and gold records and photographs of herself smiling beside presidents and movie stars, and she felt absolutely nothing. The emptiness was so complete it terrified her. She picked up a gun that Carl kept in the nightstand, turned it over in her hands, and for one suspended moment considered the mathematics of ending everything. The exhaustion, the loneliness, the relentless performance of being Dolly Parton every single day without rest or reprieve. Her dog, a small mutt named Popeye, wandered into the room and stared at her with eyes that held no judgment, only love. Something about that simple presence, that uncomplicated affection, cracked something open inside her. She put the gun down. She sat on the floor and wept until there was nothing left. Then she called a therapist and began the slow, brutal work of putting herself back together. Years later, she would speak about that afternoon with the careful precision of someone who understands exactly how close they came to disappearing. "I was looking for a way out, and thank God I found a different door. That little dog saved my life. Animals don't care if you're famous. They just love you. And sometimes, that's the only love that can reach you when you've built walls so high that nobody human can climb them." The recovery was neither swift nor linear. She took time away from the spotlight, a concept so foreign to her work ethic that it felt like learning a new language. She examined the machinery of her own ambition and discovered that somewhere along the way, the engine had started consuming the driver. She had spent so many years becoming Dolly Parton that she had forgotten how to be Dolly Rebecca, the girl from Locust Ridge who sang because singing made her feel alive, not because singing was her job. When she emerged from that dark season, something had changed. The wigs were still enormous. The rhinestones still caught every available light. The smile still sparkled with that familiar warmth. But behind the armor, there was a woman who had finally made peace with her own limitations, her own humanity, her own right to be imperfect in a world that demanded her perfection at all times. The 1990s brought an unexpected resurrection. Whitney Houston's recording of I Will Always Love You exploded across the planet in 1992, introducing Dolly's songwriting to an entirely new generation who had never heard of Porter Wagoner or the Grand Ole Opry. The royalties poured in like a river reversing its course, flowing back toward the woman who had written those words in a moment of heartbreak nearly 2 decades earlier. The song she had created to say goodbye became the financial foundation that would allow her to say hello to projects she had only dreamed about. She poured millions into Dollywood, expanding the park into a sprawling tribute to Appalachian culture that employed thousands of people from the very mountains that had once seemed like a prison of poverty. She created the Dollywood Foundation, which would eventually become the Imagination Library, a program that mails free books to children from birth until they begin school. By 2023, the program had distributed over 200 million books to children across 5 countries. The girl who had grown up without books was now ensuring that millions of children would never know that particular emptiness. But the body that had carried her through 6 decades of performance was beginning to present its invoice. The cosmetic procedures continued, each one a small battle against time that she discussed with characteristic honesty. "I look like a cartoon character," she would joke in interviews, "but that's because I was always going to be a cartoon character. I just decided to lean into it." The humor deflected from the deeper truth that maintaining the image of Dolly Parton had become a full-time occupation separate from the music itself. Her marriage to Carl Dean quietly passed its 50th anniversary in 2016, a milestone so improbable in Hollywood that it seemed almost mythological. They had survived by creating separate worlds that occasionally overlapped, his in the quiet rhythms of rural Tennessee, hers in the blinding lights of global fame. She would come home between tours and slip into a version of herself that only he had ever known. The woman beneath the wig, the voice without the microphone, the girl who still remembered what it felt like to be cold and hungry and invisible. "Carl sees me," she explained once. "Not Dolly Parton the brand, just Dolly. And there are maybe 3 people on Earth who can say that. He's one of them." The losses accumulated as the decades passed. Her parents died. Siblings died. Friends from the early Nashville days who had shared those cramped apartments and impossible dreams passed away one by one, taking pieces of her history with them. She attended funerals in the same black dress, stood at gravesides in the mountains she had once been so desperate to escape, and understood finally that fame is a poor substitute for the people who knew you before you became a monument to yourself. By 2020, Dolly Parton was 74 years old and showing no signs of stopping. She had released 47 solo studio albums. She had written over 3,000 songs. She had earned 11 Grammy Awards, 50 Grammy nominations, and been inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. The numbers were staggering, almost incomprehensible when placed beside the image of that 18-year-old girl stepping off a Greyhound bus with $47 hidden in her bra. Then the pandemic arrived, and Dolly Parton did something that would cement her legacy in ways no song ever could. She donated $1 million to Vanderbilt University Medical Center for coronavirus research, a contribution that directly funded the development of the Moderna vaccine. When the news broke, people struggled to comprehend the scope of what had happened. The woman famous for rhinestones and big hair had quietly helped save millions of lives with a single act of generosity that she had not even wanted publicized. When offered an early dose of the vaccine she had helped fund, she refused, insisting that others more vulnerable should receive it first. "I didn't do it for the attention," she said with that familiar sparkle that now carried the weight of something far deeper than showmanship. "I did it because I could. And when you can help people, you should. That's just what my mama taught me in that little cabin on Locust Ridge." In 2022, Dolly was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, despite initially declining the nomination, arguing that she had not earned a place among rock legends. The committee inducted her anyway, recognizing what the industry had taken decades to understand. Dolly Parton had transcended genre entirely. She was no longer country or pop or rock. She was something larger, a living embodiment of the American dream, told through the lens of a woman who refused to let poverty, sexism, or her own limitations define the boundaries of her ambition. Today, at 78 years old, Dolly Rebecca Parton still wakes before dawn, still writes songs in notebooks she keeps beside her bed, still records albums that debut at the top of the charts. Her body carries the scars of decades spent performing, the surgeries and procedures and physical toll of being larger than life for longer than most careers last. Every step reminds her of the price she paid for immortality, but she walks those steps anyway, refusing the wheelchair that doctors have suggested, refusing the retirement that her bank account has long since earned. The cost was not merely physical, a marriage that survived only through strategic distance, children she never held, siblings she outlived, friends who became strangers when her fame grew too bright for them to stand beside. A near suicide that she rarely discusses, except when she senses that discussing it might save someone else from that same bathroom floor. The weight of being Dolly Parton every single day for 60 years. A performance so complete that sometimes even she cannot locate the woman beneath the wig. And yet, she remains standing, not as the invincible icon the world created, but as the woman who understood something most people never learn. Real strength is not the absence of breaking. Real strength is breaking completely and choosing to rebuild anyway, knowing you will probably break again, knowing the breaking never truly stops. Her legacy is not Jolene or 9 to 5, or even I Will Always Love You, though those songs will echo long after the last person who met her has turned to dust. Her legacy is the 200 million books she gave to children who might have grown up as she did, hungry for words in homes where words were luxuries. Her legacy is the thousands of jobs she created in mountains that corporate America had forgotten, the vaccine that protected millions from a virus that could have been so much worse, the foundation she built to ensure that poverty would not define another generation the way it had defined hers. Her legacy is the proof, written in rhinestones and scars and songs that outlived their moment, that where you begin does not determine where you end. From the barefoot girl in a feed sack dress to the most honored female country artist in history, Dolly Parton's journey is a mirror held up to everyone who has ever been told they were too much or not enough. She was both simultaneously, and she transformed that contradiction into a superpower that changed the world. What lesson do you take from her story? How many times have you risen after the world expected you to stay broken? What cabin are you still trying to escape? And what songs are you writing in the dark while you wait for dawn? Share your reflections below and subscribe for more stories of those who transformed their deepest wounds into legends that outlived them. Because in the end, as Dolly herself once said with that smile that cost her everything and gave her everything in return, find out who you are and do it on purpose. The girl from Locust Ridge found out exactly who she was, and she did it so completely, so deliberately, so magnificently, that the world had no choice but to make room for her. She is still making them make room. She probably always will.